what's coming up for people? Questions? You had a bunch, yeah.
This is a burning question I've had for a long time.
Uh-oh.
The snow lions, like if the animals are, in a suffering.
Oh, what's up with the snow
It's so
lion?
hard for me until I hear from you what the reason is to picture these suffering animals holding up the crown.
Right, yeah. And the 8 snow lions are symbolic of, and I'm completely blanking out, it's symbolic of some quality. Does anybody remember what the snow lions, I can't believe I'm totally spacing out. It's symbolic. They're not like real animals holding up the throne, kind of suffering with all of this weight on them. They're all, it's sort of like the iconography of the different Buddha figures and their hand gestures and what they're holding and all of this different stuff. So they're symbolic of some kind of quality of a bodhisattva, and I just can, do you know what it is, Michael? Oh.
The same thing, it's symbolic of something.
Yeah, it's symbolic of some, and I'll check on that, because I just can't remember. It's in Pabanka Rinpoche in Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand, when he's explaining the visualization in incredible detail, and he says what the snow lions are symbolizing, and I'm just spacing out right now. And actually, it's a certain point, the throne is held up by elephants that symbolize something else, and then the snow lions are something, and I just can't remember what it is. But it's all symbolic. They're not real, it's not, actually like using animals. And in fact, it's very interesting, in the monastic vows, we're not really allowed to use like beasts of burden and things. So it's sort of something that the Buddha definitely like proscribes, to use animals and overburden animals. So it's not meant to be a literal thing. It's meant to be symbolic of something, and I'll check what it is. Yeah.
Elephants, I think, are pride. I forget the snow lions are.
Oh, okay, thank you. Yeah. Okay. Anything, Ian? Yeah.
In equanimity, when I'm trying to establish equanimity, one of the problems that I run into is when I start trying to think of others as more important than myself. I have enough trouble. That's kind of the way I generally feel anyway.
Yeah.
But,
yeah.
I don't know, it's like I want to make it as important as something.
And this is an interesting thing, and this really comes up a lot, especially when we're presenting this material, is this thing that especially in the West, we struggle with this low self-esteem thing, and a lot of times we're like codependent, and we're kind of enablers, and we're just enabling somebody else, and maybe we're in a relationship where the other person's just taking, we feel like we're giving, and then suddenly I tell you to overcome your self-cherishing, and you're like, hey, wait a minute, like all I ever do is give to other people. And I think the difference, there's this huge difference between being a bodhisattva and being a black belt codependent, and I think the difference is the view. The view, by which I mean this view of yourself as inherently existent. Like if you're in one of those kind of relationships where you're an enabler and you're always giving, and you feel, I remember growing up, my mother would always take the smallest portions, and if there wasn't enough to go around, she wouldn't take it and all of this stuff. But there was this air of sort of like she didn't feel like she deserved it in some really like inherently existent way. It wasn't because she felt like she had all of these qualities in such abundance that she could afford to just, take care of others because they were equal to her. It was sort of this thing of like, oh, I don't deserve it. And there's something very self-existent about that. Like there's some really solid view of self that in this case, instead of being arrogant and grasping, is like, oh no, I'm inherently worthless, and it's very self-existent. So I think that's as much of a danger, or maybe even more so for those of us in the West, as this prideful me thing. It's sort of that self-pity. I have this friend who is trying to practice this tantric pure vision, and in that practice, which is specific to Tantra, just to give you a little preview, you're imagining everyone around you is like enlightened beings, like, trying to help you. But she takes it to such extremes. It's like, oh, everybody else is a Buddha but me, and she's the only one that's not. And it's like, wait, in that practice, you imagine everyone, including, use. So I think sometimes we can take these things to extremes in a way that they're not meant, just because we don't really get emptiness and we're not really thinking of emptiness. And this is something I think that gives rise to this thing that you see so often in people who are like social and political activists, and it's this compassion burnout, because they really think it's up to them, you know, in some kind of solid inherent way to like fix the world, and then they're just putting out like all of this energy without thinking. It's all a product of causes and conditions. Yes, you know, you can do your bit, and we have to, and we're obligated to by our bodhisattva vows to really try and help and benefit beings, but getting so solidly attached to thinking we can really do it and it's up to us, and, you know, or the same thing is that sort of I'm worthless in this self-existent way, I'm really, you know, no good and everybody else is better than me. So I think to really, if you find yourself kind of falling into that error, to really get good teachings on emptiness and especially the selflessness of the person, and really focus on that, and then it just loosens that hard clinging to yourself as either better than or, you know, so much worse than. And like I said, it just levels out the playing field in a big way, because you just see that, you know, we're all just this conglomeration of factors that we slap this label on self, you know, and we're all deluded in the same way, and we're all just trying, and in that way you're equal to everyone else. Does that help a little bit? I think it's erring on the side of self-existence that makes those things feel so solid. Yeah, so try and work with that. But you deserve happiness as much as all other sentient beings. And I think a lot of times these texts, actually, it's interesting. Alex Berzin wrote this book on relating to a spiritual teacher. And he talked about, in a lot of the cultures that these teachings came out of, the main affliction was arrogance and pridefulness. So a lot of these teachings are about like smashing your arrogance. And we're like, I don't have arrogance, in fact, I feel pretty worthless most of the time. But the same principles apply, you know, the same principles apply. And it's just by that wrong view about how we exist applies just as much to low self-esteem as it does to pridefulness and arrogance. So you can use the same techniques to counteract it. Yeah. Okay. Anything did you have? Oh, I saw you, even in my peripheral vision. Great.
Another along the same lines. If you look at the way that, like, for instance, the Buddha behaves, Lamas behave, they have a very, you know, they have these boundaries. They're very, they know what they want to do and they go after what they want to do. This seems to go the exact opposite. It's like when the Buddha's, his father was just domineering and controlling. He just left. Basically what the Buddha wanted to do. And there seems to be, they think compassionately, but they behave like they want to, complete something. They won't let other people get in their way. And I think that this, sometimes when I do this practice, I don't know if I'm capitulating, I'm just going to become a doormat, or, you know, and do I have to just stand up, or, you know, it's just kind of hard for me to.
Yeah, and I think again, the wisdom really plays a huge part in it too. Like, you know, I think sometimes, like I was thinking about this and even mentioned it last week in class, this thing that I think it must be so hard to be a Lama, like to be a real teacher, because you have to straighten people up sometimes in like really wrathful ways for their own benefit. Like you really totally have to be over this thing of like, oh, I want people to like me, and you soft pedal everything and talk to them so nicey nice. Like you can't, you know, for their benefit. Sometimes the most compassionate thing to do to take care of other beings, like this text is just like benefit them, you know, take care of them. What's the best way to do that sometimes? Be wrathful and straighten them out. You know, it's not about being a doormat. And that's how our wisdom is so, you know, so just in the baby stages of development, and it's so mixed in with our own attachment to this eight worldly dharmas thing of like, oh, being a bodhisattva is like being nice, but it's all mixed with this motivation of wanting everybody to like you. And like you say, they set total limits. And Lama Zopa Rinpoche, boy, he'll teach like until 5 o'clock in the morning, and he could care less how everybody feels, and everybody's exhausted and they're falling asleep. And it's like if one person in that room is getting the benefit, he'll just go for it. You know, so in that way, it's sort of like breaking down all of these conventionalities to be as beneficial as possible, you know, for that given situation. And sometimes it does to us seem harsh or weird or something like that. But I think it's, you know, the lack of our development of wisdom and skillful means of what really is the best way to benefit. But for sure, it's not about being a doormat. It's sort of, but, you know, Lama Zopa will stay up all night till 5 o'clock in the morning to teach, even though, you know, people are falling asleep. But he's not kind of going, oh man, I'm tired by 11:30, I'm just going to go home. You know, that would be self-cherishing. So he's doing harsh things that seem kind of harsh or unconventional, but it's not at all out of anything to do with, you know, his own ego gratification or any kind of pleasure for him at all, you know. But I think for us, we kind of think, oh, you know, serving others is just giving them whatever they want and sort of kowtowing and being a doormat. And as you mentioned, like when you look at these holy beings, that's not what's going on at all, you know. Yeah, yeah. So it develops. I think you just work with it as you develop your wisdom and your skillful means. Yeah. Do you have more? Yeah. And then Michael has something back. Go ahead.
When you're giving happiness, I guess I'd like to hear a little more about that, because pretty much the only happiness that I know is the happiness of this hallucination. So
Yeah.
when I'm trying to give people that are, you know, hurting or poor or laboring really hard or something, happiness, I mean, ultimately the happiness is getting out of here. Sort of. So, do you go ahead and give the comforts of this life that we know it, the pleasure?
Yeah, I've heard the lamas say that. They say, go ahead, it's okay. You know, just give them even temporal happiness in the beginning. And then if you can imagine all those people, like all my lepers in the lawn chairs after they get fed and kick back a while, and then I'll send them teachers to teach them Dharma, you know. But in the moment, like whatever temporal happiness the beings want, it's fine to go ahead and give them that. And this question has come up a lot, and I've heard a lot of lamas say, yeah, it's okay, like go ahead and give them temporal happiness. And then as you continue your practice, you can certainly imagine, you know, when we imagine emanating from our body, for sure then later, you know, emanate them teachers to teach them how to get liberated from the whole 9 yards, like from the whole cycle. But in the meantime, fine to give them temporal happiness. Yeah, yeah. Michael, did you have something?
And that being in the same vein, so if you're wishing someone something will make them happy that is actually pretty delusional, that that's what they want because they think it makes them happy, doesn't that seem kind of like the wrong thing to do? To me, in a way where you would want to wish them freedom from their delusions would be the ultimate.
Well, that's the ultimate thing, but it's sort of like if someone's starving, you know, if some homeless person is sitting on the street corner and they haven't eaten anything in 3 days, do you sit down and give them a Dharma teaching, or do you give them lunch first and then teach them, you know?
Physical suffering, I see that straight away, but it's more in the West. We seem to deal a lot more with the psychological suffering.
Can you give an example of what you're thinking of?
They're always unhappy because they never got enough stuff. So when you're doing your time, you're taking on their suffering, you're giving them back all the means that they can get everything they want. But to me, that I always kind of go, well, that seems like kind of bordering on bad karma for me, you know, because you're feeding their delusion, you're not really facilitating them having the correct view.
But I think, you know, to impose your view onto others of what's best for them is maybe also not so skillful. Like in the moment, that's what they think they need. And like I say, give them what they think they need in the moment to make them happy. And I've heard lamas even say, like somebody said, oh, if somebody just wants like a sexual partner, do you visualize giving them a cute girlfriend? And the lama's like, yeah, go ahead, because that's what they want right now, you know? So that's my scriptural reference of hearing, you know, hearing lamas say, yeah, that's okay. And of course, ultimately, I mean, don't fool yourself. Don't start getting into this thing of like, ooh, I'm giving them, oh, I'd like that for me too, you know, and then you kind of fall off the wagon and think that that's going to give you lasting happiness. But in the moment, you know, don't be sort of a Dharma imperialist and decide what people should have to make them happy. Of course, you wish that for them, and then later on in the meditation, after they're nice and fed and happy and have a warm play. I mean, don't go overboard. You don't need to give them like 100 Rolls Royces. Like, that's not necessary. But whatever would give them happiness, and then for sure, visualize them having teachings of whatever their level is, and wake them up.
Session, or you do
Or as your practice progresses, I mean, I think it's challenging enough for us to want to give away any kind of good stuff. Like, we have to start small, because it's like, sometimes I think because of our self-cherishing that's so ingrained, we don't want to give away even a ham sandwich. Like, we think we're depriving ourselves of anything. So it's sort of like you start small. I mean, Master Shantideva in the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life says, start with like vegetables, start practicing generosity with vegetables, because like that you can probably pull off, and then give parts of your body later on when you've developed your capacity. So it's like, start with the easy stuff that you're not going to feel miserly. Like, go for the big guns later on when you've developed your capacity a little bit. So if you start with imagining, hungry people, and you're giving them dinner now, and then by all means, once you're a high-level bodhisattva, you're going to be able to send them emanation bodies to teach them Dharma. But like, start small and don't overload yourself with your aspirations in the beginning. And you might find your edge with potatoes, like Master Shantideva said. It's like you start giving, and you really, because of our wrong view, we really have to challenge this feeling that we have of like, ooh, I'm giving them all my good stuff. That means I'm not going to have any anymore. And this is what this practice is all about, like really challenging that innate thing of like, wait, if I'm like giving them all this stuff, what about me? So start small, start easy, and you'll find you'll progress. Your capacity will progress as you keep practicing. But remember what Master Shantideva said, like, start with vegetables, then go on to parts of your body in some future life when you can handle it. Like, you actually have, bodhisattva vows not to totally overstretch your capacity to the point that you're going to like totally freak out and throw in the towel, so be careful about that. Like I said, there's this sort of fine line between just pushing yourself slightly outside of your comfort zone and going so overboard, it's sort of that tortoise and the hare thing, like slow and steady wins the race, and you just have to start developing your capacity kind of in small ways. Does that help? Yeah? Okay. Yeah.
Kind of as a tangent to both of these questions, I've been trying to formulate this question, and I don't know if it'll come out. I've got like 3 things competing for one question. So it seems to me that this practice is really not about the other person at all in some ways, because that person that you want to not be hungry anymore isn't really going to be fed by our wishing that they be fed. But as this whole teaching is training our minds. And so, in a way, this maybe sound a little harsh, but in a way, aren't we using the suffering of other people for the benefit of our own mind transformation? You know what I mean? Like, we're, and it's easy to do because who's not suffering? That was one of the struggles I had in the meditation today. Is like, okay, well, how do I? Okay, my dad's really suffering, and so is Sarah, and oh yeah, there's my sister, and there's Iraq, and there's it's like narrow. I had a little bit of trouble just picking.
Right.
But anyway, that's kind of another question.
Yeah.
But I'm not sort of taking this practice literally. Like, okay, my dad's not going to be bitter anymore in this life, but it's more culturing my own mind and heart to have compassion. Is that?
Well, okay, so when we set our motivation at the beginning of the practice, what's the motivation for doing it? Okay. So does that help answer the question? Like, in a way, it seems like you're using them to develop your own compassion, but what's the whole point of you developing your compassion? Is it really for you?
Well, Well, in a way it is so that we can get to that place where we can really be of benefit. I mean, I feel like I can't really be of the crown benefit until I achieve my own enlightenment. So it seems like there's a place in this journey where it kind of is about you. Is that
But it is about you but I'm saying like the overall sense is, okay, yeah, I need to develop I need to focus and develop my qualities now, but why? So that I can become that Buddha and benefit others. Otherwise, why bother? Like, why bother doing all this practice? Why bother giving ourselves knee pain by sitting cross-legged? And this comes up a lot of times. Like, I went off on this long meditation retreat, and people can look at that and go, oh, gee, how selfish. You go off into this cabin in the woods by yourself for years, Well, why did I do that? The whole reason was because I had become so frustrated by how incredibly inadequate I was to do anything for anybody. Like, I'm still so stuck in my own delusions and completely overwhelmed by my own, mental afflictions that forget helping anyone, So even though what seems maybe temporarily like you're doing something, you're spending all this time working on yourself, isn't that selfish? But the ultimate motivation for it is to develop into someone who will be able to benefit all beings. So in the meantime, it might seem like you have to do something that's all about you, but the bigger picture is, if you don't do that, we're just going to be totally stuck in whatever limited way we have to benefit beings, and we're never going to be able to really provide them that way. It's sort of like, there's an analogy, okay, say you're trained in CPR, and you know how to do CPR, and so whenever you're in a movie theater and somebody says, somebody's having a heart attack, you can run over there and do CPR. Then you decide, you're so interested in medicine, you decide you're going to go off to medical school and become a heart surgeon. And this involves long training, all these years of medical school, then residency. Then your friends are going to say, but wait, you're not going to be out on the street giving CPR to all these people having heart attacks. And you go, but I'm going off for 10 years to learn how to do heart bypass surgery, so I'll really be able to help them. It won't just be doing these Band-Aids like doing CPR, but I'll really be able to do bypass surgery so they won't have heart attacks at all anymore. So people will complain that you're just going off selfishly for 10 years to become a heart surgeon. Who's going to complain like that? Who's going to say you're not on the streets anymore doing CPR because you're off in medical school? So it's just like that. I think that's a really apt analogy to what it is, So yeah, to train yourself to really benefit beings in a much deeper way means, that you need to sit on your cushion and you need to make that time, and maybe you're not going out with your friends as much, and maybe you're, not doing these things that you used to do, and your friends are going to complain, and they're going to think that they're being ignored, and they're going to think that you're selfish, but it's just, you're doing it so that you'll be able to help them. When I went off into this retreat, the first 6 months, I missed my friends so bad. Like, I have really intense relationships with people, and I had really close friendships. And it was so hard and so painful. And the only thing that kept me there was thinking, if I really love them, I'm doing the right thing. Like, if I really love them, should I leave this long retreat and go, like, hang out with them? Like, waste time, just be with them, like, loving them in this totally limited, stupid, attached way? Like, no way, I should really develop my capacity. And then because of my karmic links with them, and I would think about them and meditate about them and go, like, because of our really intense karmic connection, may I be the one to come and, like, help you out. And it kept my rear end in that hot yurt in the middle of Arizona with all those, like, creepy bugs, thinking about my friends that were really counting on me and thinking, because of my karmic connection with them, like, I could really help them if I get my act together. And that's really the only thing. And that's why bodhicitta is so important for this practice, because it's not for the faint-hearted. Boy, meditation isn't about, like, sitting around in bliss at all, like you're looking at your mind like that and, seeing these ugly things. And if it weren't for your feeling of, like, I gotta do it for the people that I love, I've gotta do it for these beings. There's no way that you could do it, So it's like that.
That is the ultimate, if we want to call it a goal. But so we don't really have to worry so much about in this Tonglen practice, like, oh gee, am I giving them the right gift of happiness?
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter that much, would you say?
You mean in terms of this question about like giving them girlfriends and all this stuff? Yeah. Basically, I mean, just kind of do it as heartfelt as you can, just do it as heartfelt as you can and just try and tune in with what they want. Because the whole thing is overcoming your miserliness and your grasping thing of, oh, I want all the good stuff for me. Like if you're just pumping it out of your heart, all of these wonderful things, that just develops your capacity to be generous and overcomes your miserliness and your clinging. So it doesn't matter so much. And if you can, emanate like Buddha realms and enlightened beings to them, that's great. Do that too, by all means, So yeah. Yeah, does that help? Okay, yeah, Casey.
It seems to be implied, but I just want to know for sure. Could this be used as a direct healing effect for the other person, like very powerfully and directly? And because we always talk about this is just for our development of compassion and things like that, but can it be used as a direct healing?
Well, that's a really interesting point, because I've heard many examples, and Lama Zopa will say this a lot, about how it can really help you. Like he says, for people with things like cancer and AIDS, if they do Tonglen when they're experiencing some incredible suffering, like the pain of cancer, he says the best thing you can do, and we'll get to this when we talk about transforming adversities into the path, he said the best thing that you can do is, if you're experiencing the pain of cancer, take it on for all others. Think of all other sentient beings and just take on all of their pain. And there have been some miraculous instances where people have gotten healing, like the lepers, like Geshe Cheka was lepers getting healed. They were sitting there going, okay, I'm experiencing the excruciating pain of having leprosy. I'm going to take on all this pain for other beings. And because of the power of their compassion, they turned the karma around so that they were healed, So in that way, it's much more effective with your own suffering. In fact, Bonnie, who's in the hospice right now, I've been talking to her and meeting with her, and I taught her this Tonglen practice, and she was so relieved, and I said, Bonnie, when you're experiencing pain, she has cancer, and I said, when you're experiencing this, I said, think of all of the other people experiencing cancer and just take it on for them. Like say, hey, it's my karma to be experiencing this right now. Let me just take the suffering of other beings. And she was so thrilled. She was like, oh, that I can do. These other complex visualizations, that's too much for me right now, but this I can do. This I can do. And like Matripa, who had the bruise on his side when he took on the suffering of the dog that had the stone thrown at them. Like, as you develop capacity, who knows, you may actually be able to heal. And like I said before, with the power of prayer, all these studies that have been done about people who are being prayed for, who are going through surgery in hospital, and their recovery rates are so much better than others. Like even at the level that we are now, it may be that our Tonglen for other people is relieving them of suffering and healing them. But for sure, if something's going on for us, there have been a lot of really dramatic stories about how people have been healed by using Tonglen, taking on the suffering that they're experiencing and trying to take it on for other people. And Lama Zopa has a lot of these stories about people. One person he was talking about, I think she was in Taiwan or Singapore or something, and, had some kind of metastatic cancer, and he gave her Tonglen practice to do, and she did it really regularly for like 6 months, and then goes back to the doctors, and they couldn't find a trace of the cancer, and they're completely blown away and kept doing all these tests going, where is it? It can't have disappeared, and she's been cancer-free for years because of the power of this practice. So there have been a lot of cases like that. Did you have something? Yeah.
Isn't Tonglen one of the practices that some of the lamas have used when they've been tortured?
Yes, I'm sure. Exactly. Any kind of suffering, and this is part of transforming obstacles into the path too. Like anything that you're experiencing, that's negative, you just try and take on the suffering of anyone else in the world that's experiencing exactly the same suffering. You just kind of say, because of past karma, I'm experiencing this right now. Let me take it on for everyone else. Like, I can't help experiencing this. So I'm sure, like, all the lamas being tortured in the prisons use this practice. Yeah. Yep. Oh,
Anything more
it's
to
okay.
say about that when it's a situation where it's some incredible negativity that a person's trying to transform? Let's say some kind of mistreatment or evil.
Yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit later when we talk about transforming problems into the path. That's sort of the next subject for this afternoon, and we'll talk about, just how to practice with all those different kinds of adversity in your life. Yeah. Yeah, Paula.
Add on that, I know this woman who was in a coma for a year when she was 18, and she said that she had never felt so loved as when she was in her coma. She felt people's love and prayers for her, and that she hadn't known she was loved before that, and what an amazing support that was for her.
Yeah.
And she did heal and come out of it. I don't know if that scientifically you could prove that, but she really said it was palpable.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it is. I think it is. I think, we're one of the classic wrong views of our age is just this scientific reductionism, thinking that everything that happens is somehow can be experienced by our five senses. And I just think there's so many cases that that's just wrong, and that there's so many different ways of communicating and benefiting other beings in ways that we can't, that can't be proved. But I think it's true. Like Casey was saying, does it really benefit? And I think for sure it does. Now, does it mean that the person that you're practicing Tonglen for gets completely cured of cancer because you're doing Tonglen? Don't know about that, but it has so many other benefits, for you and just in general. And then ultimately you will be able to benefit them and will be able to, emanate in all of these different ways as a result of doing the practice. Yeah. Yeah, Michelle.
So I got in the book that even, and I usually space out when this kind of stuff happens, but I'm curious now. Even Arya beings still are selfish. So being that I'm not one of those and probably not going to be in the near future, I just want to know, how do we, I think it's frustrating. You see that you're selfish, or I see that I'm selfish. I work with it, I try to do that. And yet, you're always or at least my mind is always kind of, it's like a ping pong ball. It's like, whoops, over there, oh my gosh, over here, oh my gosh, over there, that kind of thing. And so, is that just how it's going to be this whole life? Since Arya beings are still selfish, and, it just seems, I think it's a good realization. Don't get me wrong, I think it's all good. That's why I keep coming back. But I'm just kind of trying to get a short-term view of what the next 10 years, if I live that long, is going to be like, in terms of my mind.
Well, I think it's one of those things that, again, it's one of those balance points where you can't expect instant results. Like His Holiness the Dalai Lama is always saying this, and I've told this story so many times about him getting so wrathful when this person's like, what's the easiest, quickest, fastest? And he's like, I never want to hear you say this again. Quickest, easiest, fastest. Because it's not easy, and it's not fast. And we just see, and I think there is this whole point where we're just so frustrated, like we want to be bodhisattvas so bad, and we just see how deluded our minds are, and it just drives us nuts, it drives you crazy. But I think it's one of those things that you need to have, like, the aspiration over the long haul, and you really need to accept that it's going to be the long haul. And also, you should be able to look back and see how your mind has changed over months, years of practice. Like, look back now and look at yourself a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago. And if you don't see change, it means something's not right with your practice. And yet, still, there's so... I remember when I went into this long retreat, at first it was meant to be 3 years, and I'm like, oh, 3 years, God, by the end of 3 years, for sure I'll be an Arya Bodhisattva. Like, I couldn't imagine, meditating night and day without some incredible realization. And at the end of retreat, there were a couple of people who had done retreat together in this one place, and we'd been in silence for the whole 3 years, but we got together to talk at the end. And I remember one of the people said, yeah, the first day I walked up and saw my yurt, I did 3 prostrations and said, this is where I'm going to get enlightened. And we're all like, ah, ha, 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 because we all had this thing of like, oh, 3 years, my God, like, of course. And then I think it was just this incredibly humbling experience. I mean, for me, it just really showed me the nature of my own mind, and I was able to maybe start and just see how incredibly, but it was really good to see that, and even though in ways it was discouraging, it's like I needed to see my selfishness. If I thought I was this really nice person, not much was going to change because I wouldn't think I had much work to do. It's really important to see what you need to work on before you can even start. And then you do start and you will see progress. And I think, it's hard. It is hard because we kind of want it to happen, and especially in our culture, we don't have the long view. Everything's instantaneous, and you want your computer to have a hard drive that's even like 5 nanoseconds quicker than the one you had last year, and we just want everything like so instantaneously. But I think you do, you will see change. And just to keep thinking, since beginningless time, we've just been completely stuck in this self-grasping and self-cherishing, and we're just starting to wake up and just rejoice. Like, give yourself credit, even though you think, oh, I space out on these things, but still I keep coming back. God bless, like, you keep coming back. That's awesome, to rejoice in what we are trying to do and the efforts we make to change. And that, like, here we are spending an entire weekend trying to overcome our self-cherishing. Like, that's crazy. Like, nobody in the world is even interested in that. It's so amazing. So I think rejoicing is an antidote also to that kind of discouragement that's so easy to feel, too.
It's like the flavor of it for me is, as you become aware of your own self-grasping nature, and as you become aware of the mind doing that there is there's a level of like, I don't know if uncomfortable is the right word, but there's just that nature of it that it's different because you're noticing all the time. Whoa, oh wow, and you said something the other day about, or you said today about, somebody ordered Netflix. Well, I ordered all season 5 of 24 sitting at home right after you said that, so I keep laughing, And
I wasn't talking about you.
Well, it was like you were clairvoyant. I know you weren't talking about me, but I'm just copying to it. Anyway, but what I'm saying is, not that I'm not going to watch it. I mean, I am going to watch it.
I really appreciate honesty.
But what I'm saying is, I noticed that stuff. It's the uncomfortableness of the constant noticing of the self-grasping.
That's good.
That's what, it's like, that's what I'm saying. It's it's that constant awareness of like, oh, again.
That's really good.
So what's the advantage of that?
I think the advantage of it, I just want to say this, I came out here, 5-6 years ago, I don't know, when Venerable Sarah was here, and things were, it was just completely different in a lot of ways. And I can look back and see, as Venerable Sarah used to say, better than a year ago, not where I want to be. And every year, I hear her voice saying that, and that is true. I think the advantage of that for me is that I'm not deluded in thinking that, I really was so insane that before I, did Buddhism, that when my mind told me something, I totally believed what it said. I thought it was my best little friend just giving me down the knee for, I really did. I totally
We all did, honey.
I know. And it was so deluded. It was total insanity, obviously. But I don't think that way anymore. Not that I'm not insane, but you know what I'm saying. I don't really think that way anymore. And so the good point is, the good news, I guess, for me is that, I notice like, whoa, there's the grasping, and there's the self-cherishing, and there's that story, and there's that solidness of that sense of self. I see it, but I can't quite poke it and get through to the other side. So I just, but the good news is I think I do less harm. I do less harm because even though I see it or I think something, I know it's delusion, and I don't.
You don't
not
buy
always.
it.
I
Yeah.
don't act on it.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that
Yeah.
100% of the time, but most of the time, except with my sister, if she calls. But everyone else in the world, I don't act on it.
Yeah.
And so I think then, therefore, I've done less negative karma.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you just do it out of ignorance.
Yeah.
You know, that, or at least I did.
Mm.
But it is that uncomfortableness
Mhm.
of being aware of,
Mhm.
wow, this is so bizarre.
Mhm.
This grasping. You know,
Yeah.
I had to stop going to Costco because I'm just a slave to, the mass consumer psychology
Oh yeah.
thing. That's, I mean,
Yeah.
there's even with a list, I know I'm gonna buy something I don't need.
Yeah.
I just don't go.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's just constant self-grasping. You know.
I'm seeing it.
So that's, I mean, the best, I guess, is that I do less harm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's still uncomfortable. That's what I would like to get to a place where it wasn't. So
Yeah. Yeah. Did you have something?
She so put a figure of what I was trying to say last Sunday about my frustration.
Mm.
And then I was reading during our break, and he says it's inevitable and to be expected that the beginner meditating on kindness will occasionally create negative karma by getting angry at some of them, the very people we're trying to benefit. Therefore, we need to know how to purify immediately any negativity that we create. And just based on exactly that frustration.
Yeah.
Because, same with me. 3 years ago, when I was down, it was victim against the world. Now, I do see that I'm battling, and I get this visualization of this me stuck like a really nasty adhesive that I can't get off, and I don't even know what I'm trying to get it off of, but it's like this, it's a true internal battle of trying to peel something away that I don't want there. And then the frustration, exactly, she just voiced exactly what I feel, that frustration of, why did I snap?
Yeah.
Why did that happen? I know better.
Yeah.
And then, so I guess my question is, can we have a sequel class on purifying this kind of negativity?
Yeah, and we'll talk about that too. We'll talk a little bit more about purification, and in the Sunday morning class, we'll talk a lot about it when we get to karma, and then we'll talk about this teaching called the Four Opponent Powers, which is all about exactly how to purify your negativity. So stay tuned. It's so hard to teach these classes. I'm having this trouble on Wednesday night at Loudon Nelson. Like, you only have a limited amount of time, and you just kind of want to give everybody the whole path all at once because they need it all right this very second. And it's like, it's really hard to apportion it out and kind of decide on what to focus on, but we'll get there. We'll definitely get there. Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Sure, because you feel like you're doing something about it. I think the part of the thing that's so frustrating is like, oh great, now I see all of this crap. Now what? Now what do I do? You just feel kind of stuck with it. But that's why learning more and more about Buddhist practice, like I was talking to somebody the other day who's beginning in meditation, I was saying, it's like eventually you just get this great toolkit. You have this wonderful toolkit of meditation techniques, and whatever's going on in your life, you're like, hey, I can, I'll take out this wrench and I'll take out this screwdriver, and you have this toolkit and you have a tool that's appropriate for every situation you find yourself in. So you can just, you don't have to feel stuck and frustrated. It's like, this mental affliction is coming up. Aha, I know a meditation that will deal with that, or some little thing that will deal with that. Yeah.
The question I had to bring back too is, how often do we do this kind of meditation, giving and taking? I mean, when do we know when to do it?
Yeah. If you don't have a lot of other, like a lot of people in this room, don't have a lot of other practices to do, and what I usually recommend to people who are beginners is use that Shakyamuni Buddha practice as sort of the framework, and then insert different Lamrim meditations sort of into that as a daily practice. And some lamas have their students do Tonglen on a daily basis, And boy, it sure wouldn't hurt. Like, it's a great, if you want a daily practice to focus on, boy, this is a great one to do. Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche had his students start with shamatha, like developing single-pointed concentration for a couple of years, and then he gave them Tonglen meditation, had them do that on a daily basis. And a lot of lamas do that, you know, really encourage their people to do it on a daily basis. So if you're sort of looking around for a nice daily practice, you know, going through the different topics of the Lam Rim for one session and then doing a little bit of Tonglen every day would be a great daily practice to do. Yeah. There was some energy over here. Did you have something when they were talking about frustration? I felt a little something arising.
Lepers.
Yeah.
You know, I don't really know how it is to be a leper.
Yeah.
But, you know, like, my father, you know, it's just right there. You know, I'm out of the room.
Right.
You know.
Right.
Yes. You know,
Yeah.
I just said, you know, I'll just, you know, all my negativity, and it's like the whole thing just sort of collapses, and I have to go back and read.
Oh, yeah.
And it seems that people who've been like, the problem has been going on since I was a toddler. I just, you know, so much habit, so much karma.
Sure. Yeah.
That it, you know,
Yeah.
it's like a large iceberg.
No, it's huge. It's huge. It's so much easier to do, you know, Tonglen about the poor orphans in Kenya than it is about, like, your dad or your sister or, like, whoever it is. I mean, these are the really heavily charged relationships. And a lot of the lamas, when they teach this, they say, start with the sentient beings closest to you, because they're the really charged relationships. Like, don't think of the ones halfway around the world. Like, think of the ones in your house. That's really good. Like, start there. And a lot of times when you'll teach this equanimity meditation, people will come up and they'll go, but wait, the friend and relative and the enemy are the same person. You know, it's like, it's just one person. Like, I have to do them 3 or 4 times, and it's all the same person, because it's like, the one that pushes your buttons the most is the person that you love the most, and the one that's the closest, and that's normal. Like, that's fine. That's perfectly to be expected, because it's just a lot more easy to be equanimous about, you know, somebody halfway around the world, like the tsunami victims in Sri Lanka. Like, you don't know how annoying they are, you know, you don't know, like, they don't piss you off, you know, you don't have a relationship with them, and they don't leave the toilet seat up in the middle of the night so that you fall in, you know, they were just the victim of some natural disaster. So it's a lot harder with the people who are near and dear, and those are the sentient beings you start with, okay, because it's a lot harder. Yeah. Then they'd be really, and then they'd be the ones, yeah. And then it would be all of those pitiful Americans halfway around the world that are the ones that you have to practice Tonglen, you know, all those suffering movie stars and their drug overdoses, you know, so. Yeah.
I have sort of a block around the balance between, like, loving life and being absolutely sick of cyclic existence.
Join the club. Yeah.
I don't know, I just wanted to share that that's like a lot. I don't know if that's just a lack of understanding of, I'm sure it is, emptiness and whatnot.
I think, you know, part of it is really understanding the nature of suffering, which has so much more to do with how we relate to that life than the life itself. You know, our suffering is so much in our mind by the way that we misperceive reality. It's like suffering isn't there. Like, we don't see, like, the world is this suffering place. Like, forget it. The suffering's here. You know, the suffering is in our minds and in the way that we relate wrongly to reality. And the example that I always give is my big hero, His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Like, nobody has more fun than him. Why? Because he's not doing this push-pull thing all the time of trying to get more of the good stuff for him and trying to push away the bad stuff. I mean, you see him go through life, like, see him eat a meal. He's totally there, like, loving it. You know, there's no problem with enjoyment. The problem is that we see our enjoyment not coming from virtue that we did in the past and this whole, you know, confluence of causes and conditions that give us pleasure. We wrongly see that the pleasure comes out there from the object, so that then we engage in all of these, afflictive emotions in relationship with that object, either trying to pull the pleasant stuff towards us or push the bad stuff away. So I think it's just kind of understanding a lot more the nature of suffering and not sort of blaming the world out there or thinking that you have to think the world is a drag. It's not that the world is a drag and that there's no pleasure in the world. It just has to do with the way that we relate to mostly sense objects, thinking that, the pleasure is inherent in that sense object or the pain is inherent in that sense object and not in the way that we're relating to them. So it's just kind of more teachings on the nature of suffering and the origin of suffering, I think, will help that. Because a lot of people have that. A lot of people say, nature is pure and beautiful, and here you're saying that all of life is suffering. And that's not really what it is at all, that I'm saying, all of life is suffering and that there's no happiness anywhere. But unfortunately, the way that we relate to the objects that we see solidly existing outside of us is what creates the suffering. Yeah. So it's just kind of understanding the dynamic a little bit more and understanding karma and understanding like the 12 links of dependent origination and how our existence comes into effect. And then you see where the suffering comes from, that it's not sort of out there somewhere. Yeah. So just keep studying. It'll help. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah, Michael?
What you were just saying, so really everything we experience is kind of neutral. It's just due to our karma and delusions. It's either good or bad.
Yeah, it's like, and this gets into emptiness that we'll talk about a little bit. Like there's basically one of the ways of looking at it as, there's colors and shapes. And then your mind organizes it, because of your past karmic seeds, your predilections, whatever your mental afflictions are, your mind organizes these neutral colors and shapes into your reality. So we're slapping this imputation, we're slapping this conceptualization onto these poor, innocent colors and shapes and creating hell realms out of it, or heaven out of it, or stupid medium human realms out of it. These poor little innocent bases of imputation, we're again imperialists slapping our conceptualizations on it, and that's what reality is. And it's not all these things. And then the big mistake is thinking that it's coming from out there. Like we just created it with our imputation and we mistakenly think it's coming at us, and then we blame it for our suffering. Then we try and manipulate it instead of manipulating how we're viewing it and manipulating our karma so that we'll see the poor innocent colors and shapes differently. We try and we think it's out there, So that's basically, that's like emptiness in a nutshell. One paragraph about how we create our reality. Yeah.
Of cyclic existence that we're all in, isn't it suffering? Isn't it kind of born of suffering?
But why?
Well,
which part of it?
No, well,
is it for a Buddha?
Well, they're not in cyclic existence.
So what part of cyclic existence is suffering? It's what our minds are creating, isn't it? It's our minds creating.
Let me just argue that for a second. Okay, if I'm in Watsonville tilling the fields for artichokes, I'm going to kill all kinds of beings.
Yeah.
That's just the nature of growing plants, and that's just how the earth works.
Yeah.
There's just no way not to kill billions of little.
Right.
things.
But what I'm saying is our experience of cyclic existence is created primarily by our karma and our mental afflictions, which is why we're here. And so enlightenment isn't some other place other than here,
It's not, well,
it's an experience.
I understand that it's an experience. I haven't experienced enlightenment, so I shouldn't say that. Or emptiness or anything like that. But I thought that cyclic existence, I understand that. I get the part where we're imputing our reality onto that, and that, it's based upon our own delusions, and that if we had realization of emptiness, we would see things in a very different way. But is that to say that there is no suffering coming from the other, from its own side?
Well, I mean, this is interesting because this is a big debate.
Yeah.
And there's a big debate about, do the Buddhas experience any suffering? And it's sort of like, the way it's usually answered as, they get that we're suffering. Like they can perceive that we're suffering, so they feel compassion for us because of our suffering. So they're kind of perceiving through us, that suffering exists. But it's not their experience at all. That suffering that we experience isn't their experience at all. They just sort of experience secondhand and have compassion for us. It's sort of like a kid who wakes up in the middle of the night screaming because of nightmares, and the parent knows that the nightmare wasn't real, but the kid is like full on experiencing a nightmare. So you don't just tell the kid, oh, shut up, it's just a dream. Like you comfort them, and have compassion for them because it's 100% their experience, even though as the parent that it's not real, that there really aren't monsters under the bed or whatever it was that they dreamed. But this is a big debate, like what did the Buddhas really see and what did the Buddhas really experience, and how much, it's a fine line, this middle way between, denying that there's anything at all and, falling into the extreme that it's all really there, and it's a very, very fine line.
Reality, not ultimate